Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 87. We briefly continue ranting about Microsoft in this episode for a little bit, thanks to some of their misleading changes with Microsoft 365. And then we go and talk about some CPU-related things that Steve wanted to chat about, which largely relate to platform longevity, the sort of comparisons that we're seeing with discounts with Intel CPUs at the moment, and whether even at a discounted price, whether that makes sense or whether they need to do even more to convince people with these current platforms that their CPU is worth buying. So let's get into it. I'm kicking off this podcast right where we left off last week because I am, after another week, I am not done ranting about Microsoft Windows because at least a few things have happened since that podcast that have greatly annoyed me. So firstly, we were supposed to start recording this podcast about 5 minutes ago, but my PC just decided to randomly do a Windows update to prevent me from, using my PC as soon as I wanted to use it, which is, it runs automatic updates. Sometimes that happens, but that's, potentially annoying. But also you've just mentioned to me that you updated your PC as well and it messed up with the audio settings, which is exactly what happened, what we were talking about last time, where Windows updates just do not preserve the exact same configuration that you had previously. And that seems like that's happened to at least you as these Windows updates have happened.
Well, you've not complained about the audio on my system for quite a long time, and I changed nothing. I turn it on, we do the podcast. If I stream games, I just turn it on, open OBS. But I did upgrade to 25H2 yesterday on it, and I didn't really notice any changes, but then we joined the call and you said I was extremely quiet, and I'm going through my Rode Procaster trying to work out if anything's changed. It'll look the same. My main PC was the same, but of course it was the streaming PC, and it had changed the input volume right down. It went to 10% for some reason instead of like 40%. I don't know why. Just Windows things.
Yeah, well, another annoying Windows update thing happened this week is, I've been going through and testing some GPUs, as you would have seen on the Hardware Unbox channel. More videos in that series coming. And one of the things that I needed to do to get that video made properly was with the game Assassin's Creed Shadows, one of the more recent Windows updates basically broke that game, or at least made performance in that game significantly worse. I don't know whether this affects everyone's configurations, but this seems to be a known issue that people on Reddit have been talking about. And so the solution has been you find the specific Windows update, you go to the uninstall updates feature within Windows, you just uninstall that specific whatever update it is. It's not like a major update like 25H2. It's one of those, small KB blah, blah, blah updates. And so previously, that's what I did, got the game running back to the performance that it should have been, usually just affected GeForce GPUs, so it would pretty significantly tank performance. Like you'd get probably about 60% of the performance you should have been getting. Delete the update, it runs fine. So that's basically what I did. Didn't affect anything else. Went back to do some testing on the 5070 Ti this week. What would you know? Windows reinstalled that update. So now I had to go back and I was like, what's going on? Like this performance in this game absolutely sucks. There's got to be something broken here. I'm getting results worse than the 5070. It's because Windows reinstalled that update for me automatically, which is, of course, very nice behavior that I love. So I just love when Windows updates break things for you, you try fix them, and then it just re-breaks them for you automatically. So yeah, just love that. It's awesome. The other thing I wanted to talk about, and this is something that came as, I guess, a surprise to me because I am a Microsoft 365 subscriber and I should have known better. This is a story that I saw via Australian news media because the ACCC is just about to sue Microsoft for allegedly misleading millions of Australians with Microsoft 365 subscription hikes, so says the ABC. So for those who are not aware, for those who are outside of Australia, we have a consumer watchdog called the ACCC, which is the Australian Competition and Consumer Commission. And essentially what they do is they police this sort of behavior, misleading advertising, dodgy sort of behavior from companies, and anything that goes against Australian consumer rights. And they're suing Microsoft for allegedly misleading Australians because of price hikes for Microsoft 365. So earlier, like maybe a couple of weeks ago, I got an email, and the email said your Microsoft 365 subscription is increasing in price, which, in this day and age is nothing crazy. Subscription services always go up in price. That's happened for a lot of different things. And I really didn't think too much about it. I couldn't even really remember what I was paying previously. I saw the new price. I'm like, whatever, I need Microsoft Excel for work. I'll just accept it. Then I saw this news article. The ACCC is suing Microsoft for this alleged misleading subscription price hikes. And so essentially what has happened here is that Microsoft has started bundling Copilot into the Microsoft 365 personal and family plans with auto renewal enabled and has
Mm.
raised the price on this plan simultaneously. So essentially, they've made a modification to the plan and increased the price along with it. But they're calling the plan the same name and they're sort of just saying, well, now you have to accept this new price when your subscription renews. However, if you go and cancel or attempt to cancel your 365 subscription because maybe you don't like the price, they'll give you an option to go back to the plan you previously had at the previous price or close to the previous price without the Copilot AI integrations. So essentially, you were paying for the non-Copilot version previously at the old price. They integrate Copilot and say that now you're being charged more money. And the misleading aspect is not informing customers that you could have maintained the old price in a new plan, which is now called Microsoft 365 Personal Classic. So as opposed to the old version, the current version, Microsoft 365 Personal, if you downgrade to the classic plan, same price, no AI, you go away with your sort of, you're happy with life. You're not paying any more money for features that you're potentially not using. And what made this even more misleading is that it isn't necessarily clear on the plan change page on the Microsoft website that this classic plan exists. It appears when you try and cancel, but it doesn't necessarily appear if you just go change plan on the Microsoft subscription website. And
Mhm.
so I was pretty annoyed about this, not because, the price or anything. I was like, oh, I can't afford this service anymore. But I think this is probably one of the most misleading changes that I've seen to just keep the exact plan I was having in basically the exact same way, renaming that, hiding it under a cancellation page, and then
Mhm.
jacking up my price to include Copilot stuff that I don't need. I feel like I'm usually on top of this, but Microsoft got me good here. They totally misled me on this. So I'm very interested to see how the ACCC thing goes on this. But were you aware of this at all? Because I'm assuming you also had to deal with the price hike for 365.
No, I wasn't aware of this at all. So, yeah, no idea.
Yeah, so it's pretty bad. We saw this posted as well by some of our Discord members in our podcast channel. And immediately the reaction from at least 5 or 6 other people was like, I had absolutely no idea they had done this. I'm very annoyed at this situation. And so, yeah, this is just typical Microsoft BS. Like last week, we were talking about how Microsoft is bundling all these unnecessary things into Windows and bloating it up and making it run like crap. And Copilot, blah, blah, blah. They're doing this with Microsoft 365 as well, as it turns out. And I mean, just in the applications themselves, I mean, you would have seen things like you open up a Word document or an Excel spreadsheet and there's buttons all over the place now to start generating stuff in there. It's like, well,
Mhm.
I don't really
Mhm.
want you to generate the Excel data that I was going to put into this spreadsheet, but whatever. Like, there's a
Well,
button now that does this.
Excel's the only thing I use. Don't I can't remember the last time I opened Word. I just use Google Docs now exclusively and have done so for years. But I think it comes back to what you were saying at the start, where if you get an email saying there's a price increase or a price adjustment, if it's work related, I basically don't even read it anymore. I get them from Adobe on a fairly regular basis and the other
Yeah.
companies. So it's like I need it for work. It's whatever. What am I going to do about it? So I'm just going to pay it. But this is very dodgy. So yeah, wasn't aware of this.
Yes, yeah. I think I've got my Adobe renewal just lately, and they keep putting that price up as well, which
Yeah,
is
yeah.
always nice. But yeah, that's just typical subscriber BS. So yeah, just in the last week since we started getting very annoyed at Microsoft, or at least aired our grievances about Microsoft, they've screwed me over with the Windows updates at least a couple of times and misled me with Microsoft 365 subscription changes. So yeah, just loving life over in the Microsoft camp at the moment. I'm just super happy as a Microsoft customer. I mean, I still use Word for writing my scripts. I just prefer it to Google Docs. Don't really know why. Just it's just what I use and I'm familiar with. But yeah, it's not exactly like I'm going to be more enamored towards Microsoft and more likely to use their features and software in the future because of this change. So,
Well, I was feeling a bit upbeat. I feel blessed, Tim. I've updated all of the Office PCs to 25H2. Flawless. No problems,
really, yeah,
no issues.
okay.
I mean, yeah, apart from my audio input changing the percentage, which I can handle that.
Mm.
Yeah, no issues at all. No problems, no crashing, no blue screens, no things not working. It was all very smooth sailing. So that's all for a major update, a seasonal update. That's fantastic news. So I'm happy.
But
But now
did
I'm not
they
happy because
change?
you just ruined
Did
it all for me.
well, yeah. Did they change any of the things that we were talking about previously? Annoyances? Have they added any new features, or is it just more of the same, like exactly the same, but now it's called 25H2?
Well, now that you bring that up, nothing jumped out at me as being changed or fixed. Not that I've really gone through it all. I just made the update, had a quick look. Everything seems the same. I'm not actually sure what they advertised to have changed, to be perfectly honest. It was just that it was an update that was rolled out and I did it. But yeah, I'm really none the wiser as to what's actually changed because all the systems look and behave the same. But then I haven't used every single feature or function just yet. And I'm sure it adds things that I'm probably not interested in. So, but it works.
So last week on the podcast, we flagged briefly that you wanted to talk about a CPU related thing, but then we just talked about Microsoft for the entire episode. So let's bring that topic back and talk about Steve's CPU topic. So take it away.
Yeah, it's sort of a few topics, but they all relate together, I suppose. Recently I did the budget builds, which consisted of an AMD GPU and AMD CPU, and I've thought of expanding that series, and I'd like to do a bit more Intel content. I was like, back when AMD was sort of struggling, even with the initial sort of Ryzen CPUs, there was still a lot of content we could make around those parts that I think was relevant and a lot of people were interested in, whereas it's been difficult to achieve that with the Core Ultra 200 series. That content generally doesn't perform too well. And I was like, are we being unfair on these things? And I was just rethinking everything basically. And I was looking at the Core Ultra 5, what is it, the 225, whatever you want to call it. There's sort of that series, and they can be affordable in certain regions. I'm like, do they make sense? Anyway, when I was rethinking everything, I was sort of going back as well and looking at what we'd said, across the years and how things had played out and why Intel in the situation they're in is nothing like the situation AMD found themselves in the early days of Ryzen. And I thought we could talk about that a bit because, I think for some people it does seem like Intel gets treated a bit unfairly or whatever it may be. But really, I think we and others have been consistent the whole way through this. And I think the reason why Intel find themselves in the situation they do, where they've basically admitted that the Core Ultra 200 series has massively underperformed in terms of sales and hasn't been at all successful for the company. We've made videos over the years as well, Tim. We made What Does Intel Need to Fix at a Computex. I think we might have made one or two of those videos. And really, to this day, I don't think let's say one thing, because I'm sure there might be one thing, but of the numerous grievances we had with Intel and what they offer and how they go about doing it, they haven't really addressed those things. But I'll give you a specific example, what I came across. So AMD released the Ryzen 7 2700X back in April of 2018. So that was meant to be a $330 US processor, 8 cores, 16 threads, pretty good for productivity at the time. After the release of that processor, Intel came out with the Core i9 9900K, which was another 8-core, 16-thread processor that was made to counter AMD's offering there. That was released October 2018, so later the same year, but it was $500 US, so pretty expensive flagship desktop processor there. And that meant at MSRP, Intel was meant to cost 52% more than AMD. So already, just if you honor the MSRPs there for both parts, that's a massive pricing discrepancy, making AMD much more affordable. But the 2700X, prior to the release of the 9900K, was already selling below the MSRP. And it was like just 1 month after the introduction of the 9900K, AMD dropped the 2700X to an all-time low of just $130 US. So you have AMD's flagship desktop CPU, so ignoring high-end desktop stuff, their flagship desktop CPU, selling for $130 US. And then on the Intel side of the fence, it was, I think you could get them for $500 US on release or shortly after, but let's say it was thereabout. I think the MSRP for 1,000 unit loss was like $490 US, but they were selling for $500 US or more. So that is an incredible, almost 4 times, well, it's about a 4 times increase in price, isn't it? Now, I found through my low resolution CPU bound testing that the 9900K was typically 20% faster than the 2700X for gaming. So we're talking like the very CPU demanding examples, not where you might be GPU limited or the game doesn't use much CPU, like a modern title like Black Myth Wukong. So in Battlefield 5, 64-player Conquest, I found it was 16% faster on average. So the i9, 16% faster on average. Enough games, and I found it was 20%. But for additional context, like Tech Power Up, they found the margin was more like, well, it was less than 10%, but there was more GPU-bound titles in that suite, I would say. But if we go on my numbers, I would say the 9900K was typically 20% faster than the 2700X for CPU-bound gaming. And so what that means is when Intel had 20% greater gaming performance than AMD, so 9900K versus 2700X, with, I think it's fair to say, similar productivity performance. I think they traded blows depending on the application and whether it was more single-threaded or multi-threaded. But in that scenario, at current pricing, real world, real retail pricing, you're paying 280% more for the 9900K. So yeah, the 9900K was the superior CPU. We said so at the time. We said if you want an uncompromised, like the best of the best, buy yourself an i9 9900K. But if you're talking about value, I don't see how you could argue that the 2700X isn't the best value sort of all-rounder CPU. That was what we said. That was the history of that matchup. Today, AMD has, in my opinion, based on our testing, on average, 20% plus. So we saw 25 to 35%, depending on quality settings and games used and all that sort of stuff. But let's say 20% greater gaming performance than Intel's 285K. So that's the 9800X3, or that's the 9950X3D versus the 285K. But you get a similar thing with the 9800X3D for gaming, of course. But the 9950X3D costs just 20% more than the 285K. And I think it's fair to say, at least in my opinion, they offer similar productivity performance. So we have this situation where AMD is offering much better gaming performance with similar productivity performance, and they're only charging about 20% more instead of 280% more. So when AMD wasn't that competitive in terms of gaming performance, but had solid productivity performance, their CPUs were 75% cheaper than Intel. So we're sort of going the other way there on the percentages. But with the tables turned, Intel's just 18% cheaper than AMD. And then there's more to this as well, obviously, because there's the whole, and this is the next angle of this discussion, is platform longevity. So the 9900K, that was the end of the road there. There was no upgrade path for people who bought a motherboard, memory, 9900K. That was it. And again, you were getting, I say, 20% better performance in CPU limited gaming. So that's a pretty easy argument if you want the best performance. But then there was the upgrade options. So for those who bought a 2700X, especially if they got one cheap for like $130 US, they could upgrade to Zen 2, they could upgrade to Zen 3, and they also got the introduction of AMD's 3D V-Cache with the 5800X 3D. Now, interesting, and this isn't me. Why I like this conversation is this isn't future projections or guesses or whatever. This is where bringing up past history, like this is what
it's the facts.
Happened.
It's what happened.
It's facts. Where the 5800X 3D was released 4 years after the 2700X, and in mid 2023 could be purchased for $280 US. So the 5800X 3D is on average 40% faster than a 9900K for CPU limited gaming. So it's a much faster product. And basically what that means is you could have bought the better value 2700X, which was very good for gaming at the time. Wasn't as fast as Intel stuff, but it was very usable. And it had known platform longevity at that point in time. What that was actually going to get you, that was the gamble. But AMD were like, we're committed to this. We're going to keep making them better. And we'd already seen that, right? The 2700X was a good bit better than the 1700X, for example. They'd improve things like DRAM latency, core-to-core latency, all that sort of stuff, which really did help with gaming. So if you bought yourself a discounted 2700X and then 4 years later bought a 5800X 3D for $280 US, you still had like almost $100 US in your pocket on what a 9900K would have cost you. And you would have got very good performance back then, and now you're getting significantly better performance than a 1900K. And then if you want to upgrade the 1900K, what do? Would you go to 10th gen, buy a new motherboard, do all of that, and what you're getting, not even 5800X 3D performance. I guess if you do some tuning and overclocking, you might get there. Really, to get there, you've got to go to 12th gen, 13th, 14th gen will achieve it. If you look at it that way and you look at what Intel is offering today, it's, again, I keep coming back to this, it's difficult to recommend you invest in a 200 series CPU or a 14th gen CPU on these known dead platforms. And yeah, I know that there's getting a refresh on that platform, but that doesn't count. That's like saying that 14th gen was a new thing from 13th gen. It was just a refresh.
Whenever I see these, comments or discussion about, hey, look how cheap Intel's current CPUs are, and I look at like what the actual prices of those CPUs are, they just don't seem like that good of a discount. Like, I know that they often are taking off over $100 off the MSRP of the CPU or whatever, but it still doesn't really put it into that territory of like, yeah, I would definitely get that over a current AMD CPU, because as you've sort of mentioned, AMD was sort of doing all the community stuff in addition to having the price to performance available for buyers. And by the community stuff, I mean the platform longevity. And also they were offering things like CPU overclocking across the entire lineup, memory overclocking across the entire lineup, which at the time was a feature that was only available on Intel's K SKUs. And so they were sort of looking at the things, the frustrations of, what would someone buying an Intel CPU be annoyed about and would want, especially for a value conscious buyer, what would they want? And so they sort of thought better price to performance. They'd want to be able to upgrade this into better products later. They'd want to be able to overclock it, tweak it, customize it to try and get a bit more performance out of it. And so they were sort of went through and they ticked all those boxes. Whereas Intel today, well, they can't really offer the platform longevity because they set up the platform to not offer that from a while out. So that was sort of a mistake that they've made previously that sort of has come to bite them today. But then on top of that, they're just not offering that price to performance ratio that they need. And I sort of see that as similar, I guess, to how Radeon has sort of tried to compete with GeForce, and something that we've criticized Radeon for over the years is sort of looking at where the competition is with NVIDIA. And how there was always this kind of meme of like, it's GeForce minus $50 and how that's not necessarily doing enough to get someone to buy a Radeon card over GeForce. It feels a bit like Intel's processors are a bit like that. They look at where Zen is, and previously maybe the parts were worse value or not really, priced based on productivity performance or whatever. I think with the latest generation, that was certainly the case for some of their products. And they've sort of gone, okay, well, now we can offer Zen 5 minus a small margin, and hopefully that will get people interested. But that just, it's nowhere near the sort of discounts that you were suggesting, where people could buy a product that was 20% slower, but for like $150, which is just like insane pricing. And to be fair, AMD was doing that not just because of the competition of the 9900K at the time. When they launched their parts and before the 9900K was available, they still had to compete in gaming with things like the 8700K, which was still a very powerful processor. And I think that launched for only something like $380 or something around that price,
that's right.
$380. So it was a little more price competitive there. And then I think what benefited AMD and sort of showed the strategy of platform longevity is that you mentioned the 9900K was launched in October of 2018. Well, by the middle of 2019, we got Zen 3, which
Mm-hmm.
was, again, another pretty significant performance improvement and sort of showed the evolution of what AMD was achieving. And I think by that point, which wasn't that far after the 9900K was established as the best gaming processor, that people were sort of seeing like that progress and the platform longevity was starting to pay out. I think once those parts started coming down, the whole ecosystem really pushed ahead significantly and sort of enabled AMD to have the success in the AM4 platform started from that point. Whereas with Arrow Lake, like they can't offer that at all. Like as you've mentioned, no platform longevity. So they can't start offering and saying to people, hey, buy this CPU for $120 and then in a couple of years you can upgrade to something else, because they can't do that. So
Mm-hmm.
yeah, they're in this really tough position where and maybe they're expecting Arrow Lake to be a bit more competitive than it was, so they didn't feel the need to offer the platform longevity, but that I think is really bitten them. And to be fair, they probably should have known better, considering platforms like LGA 775 back in the day had pretty great platform longevity. You could get some pretty big performance uplifts on that platform depending on the product you bought. And then ever since then, it's been, this sort of 2 generation or 3 if you're lucky sort of thing.
For me, it's a huge problem recommending it. But even if let's pretend we don't test CPUs at all and we're just commenting on tech, we're looking at Tech Power Up and other places, and we're trying to work out, what you should buy. And I'm having a look now at the Core Ultra 7 265K, brand new at Newegg. It's $310 US for the CPU, which is, really good CPU for that money. Or you're paying $370 for the Ryzen 9 9900X. So it's like $60 more for the AMD CPU. That's not nothing. But I jump over to Tech Power Up's Intel Core Ultra 7 265K review. And really, for productivity, when you're talking about, out of the box, memory profiles loaded, the 9900K is right there with the 265K. Like, it's generally a little bit faster, but it depends on, sometimes it's a lot faster depending on what it is. But yeah, generally I would say they sort of trade blows. Looking more into their data, look, the 9900X is overall a faster, Microsoft Visual Studio C++. It took like 42 seconds to compile on the Ryzen processor. It was 46 seconds on the Core Ultra 7. So,
Okay.
if you get a bigger workload though, that difference starts to add up. But let's just say, for the sake of argument, they're much of a muchness, right? I'm just having a look at their gaming performance now, and again, the 9900X is ahead by a couple of percent. At 720p, it's like 185 FPS to 195 FPS. So with the advantage they're going towards Ryzen. But again, let's just say overall gaming performance is much of a muchness. So you've got 2 CPUs, realistically pretty similar price range, pretty similar performance. What gets you over the line? Like, which one do you buy based on that? And if you buy the 9900X and invest in an AM5 motherboard and all that, we already know you're getting Zen 6. What's that going to offer? Don't know. But I know it's going to offer more than a 200 refresh. And if you end up getting Zen 7, then that's massive, and it just becomes AM4 repeating itself. So we're taking a known example. For me to turn around and go, okay, let's ignore the 9900X, it's not worth it. The 265K is just, it's the all-rounder value king. It's exceptional value. It's got to be like $200, right?
Yeah, I sort of think that you basically need to be getting the motherboard for free, because that is the main. I mean, there's the convenience angle as well, right? It is inconvenient to have to swap out your motherboard for, like, let's say you bought Arrow Lake and then you want to upgrade soon. Like, it's pretty inconvenient to switch out the motherboard and do all that stuff. But then there's obviously the cost angle as well. You physically have to buy another motherboard to support the next generation CPU that you want to go to. So at the bare minimum, they need to be offering you that motherboard for free, because then across 2 CPU generations, you're only buying one motherboard. The same as what you'd see on an AMD side, where you buy an AM5 motherboard, use it for potentially 2 CPUs. So yeah, they'd basically have to bundle in the the CPU, the motherboard for free with the CPU, then they'd have to obviously adjust the price as well to account for the gaming performance differences. So,
Mhm.
I think, they could sort of argue that the performance of a 265K is, for productivity is more competitive with the higher part in AMD's lineup. But for gaming, like that's the majority of desktop buys. We already know that most people are buying, DIY CPUs for gaming. And so they need to be price competitive for that. Then they need to throw in sort of the inconvenience factor of if you did want to upgrade, you have to swap out the motherboard, which is annoying because even at price parity, like let's say you got the motherboard for free and it was cost per frame or whatever the same as the AMD CPU for gaming, you'd probably still pick the AMD platform for the reason that if you did want to do a CPU upgrade, it's just you take off the cooler, swap the CPUs, put the cooler back on, away you go. With the Intel platform, you have to take out the entire motherboard, basically strip your PC back, and then insert the new thing, which again, like people probably say in the comments, that'll only take me an hour or so across, years of using these things. It's not a huge deal. But I'm just saying, like in a parity situation, you're sort of thinking about the other factors that may swing you one way or another.
Mhm.
And so, it just sort of starts to add up in terms of the things that Intel needs to be offering to counter those sorts of things. Because at least for like my gaming PC, I don't really care about the productivity performance of the CPU. So
Mhm.
even if AMD was offering less productivity performance, I don't really care. Like it's just the gaming performance is what I'm after for that platform, really.
Yeah, we're certainly not suggesting buy a CPU because it has guaranteed platform longevity. Like, that's absolutely not the case and has never ever been the case. It's just a factor to consider. And when you consider all of the factors, how much of a difference that makes, well, it depends. And I would, if the 2700X was $330 US, and you're paying 300, or say you're paying $400 US for the Intel processor and it was faster and everything like we just talked about, then I wouldn't have been that, excited about the 2700X. I would have been like, it's not really worth it. We don't know what the future holds for that platform. Intel offers superior gaming performance now. It doesn't cost much more. That's the way I would go. But it
Mm.
wasn't the case. It was $130 US. So people who look back and go, I can't believe people recommended those Ryzen CPUs. Look how slow they are today. They're missing a very core component to that conversation that A, they were dirt cheap, and B, they had a promised upgrade path. And, we know the history of AMD trying to screw that up, but they didn't. they,
Yeah.
they didn't in the end, thankfully.
I think one thing as well to add into this before we move on slightly is
Mhm.
that I think I think AMD back in the day was more aware of the position that their processors were in. Like they were more aware during the development phase that a product like Zen 2 probably wasn't going to be overly competitive for gaming performance. And so, they made some decisions that would allow them to compete. Again, the platform longevity stuff, but also there's a lot of price flexibility with that product. So, if you look back at AMD's Ryzen 2000 products, and you sort of look at how economical that design was, Intel was doing a larger sort of monolithic design, and we also had Ryzen on the monolithic designs as well on a pretty cheap Global Foundries 12 nanometer manufacturing node, which allowed them tons of price flexibility. They could just dump the prices of these things, really no issue, and allow them to compete. Whereas you look at, I think with Arrow Lake, it seems like Intel probably expected this product to perform a bit better than it did for gaming applications. And maybe they thought it would be a bit more competitive with whatever AMD would have at the time, hence why they didn't factor in things like platform longevity. But also, the design of the product is much more complicated than AMD's parts at the time. So there's a lot less price flexibility on these sorts of things.
Mhm.
They've currently got 4 different tiles that make up the Arrow Lake processor, including the compute tile on TSMC N3B, which is the very latest cutting edge node at the time from TSMC. And then you've got a 5 nanometer graphics tile, the SoC tile, and then they have to put all of this using advanced packaging together, which means that we're talking about the products needing to be like maybe $150 or $200 or whatever. They may be losing money on this processor if they put it down to those sorts of prices because the
Mhm.
design is just much more complicated and not suited to that sort of price dumping, unlike what we saw with the 12 nanometer parts from AMD back in the day.
And again, that's platform longevity. Like, I the importance of this really, I can't emphasize it enough. So if they had have released the Core Ultra 200 series and said, we've got this new socket and we're committed to this for, even if it said 3 generations, but let's say 4, because that's a mega deal. If you now know you're getting 4 generations of Intel CPUs, they're making all these architectural improvements and changes over the journey. They know they need to compete more, yada, yada, yada. If you're looking at like a comparison I just made between the 265K and the 9900X, and you're like, well, the 9900X really didn't do much over the 7900X. Zen 5 was a flop, in my opinion. And we've got Zen 6, what's that going to offer? Not sure. Lost a bit of confidence there. And then rumors that are projected so far out are saying Zen 7 is going to be on the socket. I don't know. But Intel has officially come out and said they're doing 4 generations. At least from my perspective, I can recommend that product. I can say, well, we know we're getting better support. Like we've got guaranteed support here from Intel for, and price is similar now, performance is similar. So, weigh up your options, look at the workloads and games you play and see how they perform. But generally speaking, I can recommend the 265K. And that would absolutely be the situation. But when we find ourselves in a repeat situation, but Intel's even at more of a disadvantage, in my opinion, because of that, about an hour before we went live on the podcast, I put up a poll on the Hardware Unboxed channel saying, how important is platform longevity to you? As in the ability to upgrade your CPU in the future without having to buy a new motherboard. So pretty simple question. We've had about 5,000 people vote so far, and the overwhelming majority of people who have voted on the poll have said the platform longevity is very important. It's a key selling point. So that's 61%. Then 32% of all people who voted said it's somewhat important. So read into that how you will, but and then people are like, not important at all. I guess it's not a consideration for them or they don't care about it, is 7%. So very much the minority there. So I think it's fair to say, at least from our audience, which I think is a similar audience to most large or just tech channels like Gamers Nexus or whoever, vast majority seem to feel the same way we do, which I think it makes sense, right? Like,
our audience likes our opinions. Does make sense, but also from the angle that it makes sense from the actual product standpoint.
It's hard to go against it, right? Like logically, if I interview as Joe Consumer, I'm like, hey, would you like the ability to have flexibility in your upgrades and have options in the future? Or would you rather buy the platform and have no ability to upgrade it without investing hundreds of dollars to get a new motherboard? Like, what are we even asking here? So,
and remember when we were talking about APUs lately? Like, and how, some people are getting upset. We were saying APUs don't really make a lot of sense for desktop platforms. Well, I mean, 61% of people on our poll are saying that platform longevity and the ability to upgrade is very important. And one of the key things that APUs takes away from you as a consumer and as a gamer is the ability to upgrade more easily. Because again, the
we're talking
combining
about
of
Strix
components.
Halo. We're talking about the more impressive APUs, not the in-socketed APUs.
Even in-socketed ones, they're combining a CPU and GPU together, so you still have to upgrade both at the same time. Whereas with the desktop platform as it currently is, you can pick and choose your components and only upgrade one or the other. But yeah, obviously with Strix Halo, it goes a step further, an embedded sort of thing, soldered motherboard with memory on it and stuff like that makes it even worse for upgradability and longevity. And so, yeah, if a majority of people are sort of saying we really highly value this feature, then APUs obviously, makes it a more difficult point.
Just to be clear, though, people argue that like a Ryzen 5 8600G is a great placeholder because it gives them a CPU that works now and allows them to use their system while having a use. Yeah. So just to be clear on that one. But also, it points out that we are being consistent on this topic. Like when it's, when AMD is doing a thing that we feel doesn't have the flexibility that we like, then we sort of poo-poo that product. We're like, we're not a fan of like Strix Halo. We think it's, overhyped, overrated. However, it's again, it's technically impressive. So just chill on that front. We think it's a technically impressive product. we just don't think it's a product that really makes sense given the price and then its inability to be upgraded. So the vast majority of people seem to now think that platform longevity is a key selling point. And without question, in the early days of AM4, that wouldn't have been the situation. Like, a lot of people were not that hyped or that excited about this platform longevity, the idea of having, multiple actual architectural generations on the same socket. And I think a lot of people have now seen the facts. They've seen how history actually played out for themselves, and they've seen how a 2700X 9900K, option played out. And again, it's largely due to the pricing and the aggressive pricing structure there by AMD. But even now, people are tossing up between buying like a Ryzen 5 7600 and maybe a discounted 14600K. And the 14600K is a very powerful, very, very good value CPU for gaming and productivity. But I would still recommend the 7600. Now, if we revisit this conversation in 3 years or so, going to be pretty interesting to see how that pans out. I don't know, but it will be interesting to see what the options end up being for those that jumped on AM5 with a cheap CPU today. And because, of course, with platform longevity, it's not like this be all end all, like solve all the problems, right? Because you can still jump on a platform like AM4 at the end of the platform's life and end up in the same problem you would with like a 9900K. But it's a thing you would rather have a platform have than not have. Like, I guess that's where the hang up for me is I can't really comprehend the opinion of those who are like, it's not important, or it's no one uses, or it doesn't matter, or I don't want it, or it's not a benefit. It's just a weird position to take.
It's always better. Like, it's, if you have some sort of, like, I'd love to hear a point that would sort of suggest that platform longevity is actually worse for the consumer, because that's just crazy town thinking to me. I can understand how someone would say it's not important for them, because there are people that don't upgrade very often. Like, if you only upgrade your PC every 6 to 8 years, then you're probably upgrading to a new platform every time. And so having platform longevity doesn't really matter in that sense, but you have to be confident that that's what you're going to use your PC as. You're going to have to be confident that there's no circumstance changes. You're not going to want more performance mid-cycle. You definitely do upgrade every, let's say, 8 years. Because
you have to push it out to 8. So
it basically has to be at this point. I mean, if you bought if you bought right now into AM5 and you only upgraded in 6 years, you're probably facing another platform at that point. But yeah, it's like,
it's really hard to say, because things get pushed out a bit further now. And, I think the way a lot of people are thinking about this is back many, many generations ago when things moved at a much more rapid pace. It's sort of an old way of thinking about it. I'm not saying that's always the case, but so basically, example you just talked about, I after I made the poll and it was very clear that, the vast majority of people saw platform longevity as being very important, a key selling point. I was like, okay, well, we've heard that the majority of people agree with this, but I'm more interested in the people who don't agree with this, so we can sort of understand their way of thinking, understand their argument, maybe learn something new, or get a new angle on this. So I just said to people, if you think platform longevity isn't important, give me your best argument for why it's not important. And I haven't, I made this like going live, so there's quite a few comments now, so I'm probably not going to be able to read through all of them and address them, but I've grabbed a couple of the top, like, most upvoted ones. And so Max has said, I don't want to bother buying new PC parts every few years, and I like to keep my PC 5 years or more, probably like 6 to 7. Upgrading on the platform usually isn't worth it, since a new platform will be out. And again, I don't agree with this at all. I logically, this doesn't make sense to me for a few reasons. So first of all, in the Zen 4 example, the AM4 example with the original Zen architecture, that was released in early 2017, and we didn't get AM5 until early 2023. So it's like 6 years. But the thing with AM5 is it cost a ton of money out of the gate. And if you go back and look at my reviews, they were AMD CPUs. We weren't happy about them at all. Like, DDR5 was too expensive. It was coming down. But even the CPUs themselves, pretty underwhelming. Like, when you go to a brand new platform and you require a new motherboard and new memory, you expect a substantial improvement. But in my opinion, at least out of the gate, we didn't get that. So with Zen 4 over Zen 3.
The X3D part came later, right? So you were sort of comparing the stock Zen 4 products, the non-Vcache models, with like a 5800 X3D. And the conclusion was that it was very similar in performance at best.
And like parts such as the Ryzen 5 series were very expensive. So the CPUs themselves were expensive. The motherboards were hideously expensive. The DDR5 memory was hideously expensive. And it was underwhelming. It wasn't something you would jump on straight away. So you'd be waiting at least, I think it turned out to be about another year, right? Before things got good
about
there,
that,
let's say.
It was probably about a year until DDR5 started coming down to a sort of quote unquote normal price, which ironically it's gone the other way. It's gone back up to launch pricing now. But yeah, there was that period where, about a year after launch, it was pretty decent.
So you're talking 7 years there. So let's just analyze this a bit further. So if you had have bought into Zen 5 in 2017, I'll get to Intel in a moment. If you had have bought what? A Ryzen 7 1700 or something. Let's say you bought that. What, he's going to hold on to that CPU for 7 years before AM5 becomes good value and you upgrade then?
I guess that's what people are suggesting.
The whole point of the great platform longevity is that you could have bought a Ryzen 7 3700X a few years later for very little money and got a substantial performance upgrade. And that thing wasn't much slower than the 9900K. And then you could have got a discounted 5800X 3D. So every few years with this same computer, you're refreshing it for a very minimal investment, very minimal effort, and you're breathing new life into it and getting it like up to speed every couple of years. I mean, that seems like, because if we go back to, so what was out in 2017 from, what were your options in 2017 from Intel? So it must have been
probably the 7700K from memory.
Yeah, see, I don't understand this at all, Tim. So if you were building in early 2017, which is when the AM4 platform arrived, Intel refreshed, didn't they? Was it the sixth? Yeah, they refreshed 6th generation, I'm pretty sure. That was the same socket. Yeah, you got the 6700K, which was Skylake. And then that was just, so that became the 1700K, which was Kaby Lake. That was a $340 US part at least. It was probably more like $360 for a 7700K. It's a quad core. So if you bought that in 2017, what, you're still using it up until about a year ago? Like, what? That's a very slow. Yeah, that's not a good experience.
The argument, right, is that you're buying the higher performing part at the time and keeping it for longer. Right?
I guess
so. The 7700K was obviously the faster product for gaming at the time. And so I guess the theory is that if you don't upgrade very often, like you only upgrade every 8 years or something, that by the time 8 years comes around, you still got the faster part than you would have bought back then. But then I guess there's some people that do this, but a 7700K, for a lot of games today is not adequate.
It's not usable.
For performance.
No, it's terrible.
Even if you're talking about today's single player titles and stuff like that, like obviously for competitive games, it's out of the question being CPU limited, but the other games today will really struggle on a part like that, as they would on the AMD product. It's just that you could have upgraded the AMD product and you couldn't do that with the Intel product.
Well, that same year, Intel sort of realized the error of their ways. They released the 8700K, which tacked on 2 more cores, but it required it was the same. It was a revision of the socket that was in no way compatible according to Intel, though I'm pretty sure some people made it work. But anyway, 8700K required a new chipset, new motherboard. That was released later the same year, October 2017, for pretty much the same price. So if you bought a 7700K, you got massively shafted, and you were better off buying an 8700K, which was a really good gaming CPU. 6 cores, 12 threads, and then later on that socket, you got the 9900K. But we've already gone down history lane on that one, and that turns out that wasn't the way to go, because the competing Ryzen parts were just dirt cheap, and they had an actual upgrade path that proved to be very fruitful. So I'd love to know the example of someone who bought one of these systems like 6-7 years ago, as this person's saying. And again, it's missing the point. You don't really get the point, because if you bought a 7700K and then 6-7 years later, you're not buying a new system if you can put a 5800X 3D level part in that computer. Because you don't need new PCI Express spec. You don't need your SSD to be faster. If you need more USB or high-speed USB ports, buy a USB 4 expansion card and whack that in there. You need faster Wi-Fi, get a USB or PCI Express expansion card.
And the Ryzen, the cheapest Ryzen parts of today are sort of similar to a 5800X3D, like your Zen 4 Ryzen 5 parts are not exactly like significantly faster to the point where you'd be like, yeah, I'm definitely going to do the whole platform upgrade thing. And I think the issue with these sorts of things as well is that this discussion only makes, it doesn't really make sense, but it makes even less sense if you're talking about Intel's like mid-range to budget parts, because the whole thing with those parts, just for a start, are just so much slower and offer even worse like longevity in terms of the performance side. So if you quote unquote never upgrade and you bought, I don't know, back when the Kaby Lake parts, what do they have, like a Core i3 7300 or something? Like, yeah, that just part is just completely cooked. And you could have bought it for probably about $150 US back in the day. So that would have been the price equivalent to the cheap Ryzen parts at the time, except that part you could only ever take it up to something like a 9900K, which would have been significantly faster. But if you went the other way and you spent about the same amount of money on the AM4 platform, you could have taken it to a 5800X3D. And then going the other way, if you had bought the 7700K for $350, how many CPUs could you have purchased in the Ryzen platform for about that same amount of price? Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, to go with this whole, I buy a CPU platform and keep it for 7 years, you pretty much always have to be targeting like the top end of that range to get anywhere near the level of years of use out of it that you'd expect. And I guess what we always question is that going to be as good over the lifespan of that product as buying the cheaper model and then saving the money and using that money 2 or 3 years down the line to upgrade? And I think we've shown in pretty much any historical configuration that we've looked at that the better option was to buy the cheap product, upgrade it a few years later, especially if you're not buying a 5800X3 at launch, but you're sort of waiting maybe a year or two after launch when they become much cheaper. And then both of those products combined, as we've talked about sort of towards the start of this podcast, the cost, the economic side of things just doesn't work out.
Well, that's what I find humorous about this with these best arguments against this, because they're talking about 6-7 years, but it was 6-7 years before AM4 ended. So if you upgrade every 6 years, you should, that's where advocating for platform longevity makes the most sense. Not for the people who upgrade every 2 or 3 years. Because again, like from Zen 4 to Zen 5, you got nothing, but maybe Zen 6 will offer quite a bit, and there you go. And, so on and so forth. And we already saw it on AM4. But again, AM4, from the introduction of that platform to the introduction of the next platform, was a 6-year gap. And realistically, it was more like 7 years before the other platform became a viable option. Because generally when AMD moves to a new platform, it's to support a new memory technology, which always comes at a stupid premium. Like always, it just never hasn't been the case. So
you get screwed over with platform longevity the later into that platform that you buy, because there's going to be fewer years supported and fewer upgrade paths and that sort of thing. But that is, of course, something you have to factor into your buying decision. And so, if you're jumping in, if you had jumped into AM4 with, say, the Zen 2 era with the Ryzen 3000 parts, then yeah, you didn't get as much of an upgrade path as you got if you would have jumped in at Ryzen 1000, and you would have factored that into your buying decision. But I think the issue that those discussions have faced is that there's never really been a time where unless you were jumping in right at the very end of an AMD platform, that Intel has offered clearly better platform support. Like in the Zen 3 era, it was, Intel was offering 2 years of platform support, or maybe 3 with like a refresh of or something. So there was never like you're buying at the end of the AMD platform, but Intel, they've got 4 years going on their platform. And so you're sort of tossing up this very limited platform longevity versus tons of platform longevity. It was either AMD had clearly better platform longevity, or worst case, it was pretty similar to Intel's platforms at the time.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, there's never really been that point in time when the platform longevity angle hasn't played out, and that's because of Intel's choices with not offering it. So there's like again, like I get this, the whole thing of like, one of the upvoted comments here is, if I'm building it for someone else, they're probably not going to be opening that PC and upgrading it, because they might be more of a novice user or whatever, that sort of thing. I get it, but you might still want the option. Like if there's two products that are fairly similar for whatever reason, as we've been sorting.
What happens if that person comes, like, is this a friend? Who are we talking about here? So what happens, let's just say it's a friend because, well, let's just say. Yeah. So if you build your friend a computer and you're like, well, the CPUs were similar performance, similar price, so I just got you this one because I like Intel or whatever it may be. Fine, okay.
Mm-hmm. Or it's Arrow Lake on sale or something.
Sure. Yep. Okay. And then your friend comes back 3 years later. Oh, the CPU is getting pretty slow for the new Battlefield game or whatever it may be. Can we get a bit more CPU performance in the system? Yep, sure. It's going to require a new motherboard, possibly memory, and a new CPU. And the friend might not know any better, but that you could have just got them a CPU, chuck that in there, and it would be easier for you as well because you just update the BIOS, chuck the CPU in, load the memory profile. Job done there. They're getting likely substantially more performance if you've bothered to do it. That would, so
Mm-hmm.
It doesn't really make sense that way. And again, if I'm building someone a computer, I want to look after them. And if I'm certain something is going to have better support in the future, and it's been proven with just the most recent previous generation that was indeed the case, then why wouldn't you do that?
Yeah.
But again, that's not an argument against it anyway. Like you're arguing for something that's less consumer friendly, which just doesn't make sense.
I think some of the other angles here are things like, majority of people I know don't bother upgrading. They build one PC every 4 to 6 years, so longevity isn't really important. Again, I get that angle. I feel like, though, that's more of an ignorant side of things. Like if you're building a brand new PC every 4 to 6 years, you're not really understanding the landscape of what you could have done with upgrades and things like that. Like if you feel like you need to build an entire new system every time that you need new performance, then you're just missing out. Like you could, and again, if you did research, you probably would be a little disappointed.
To be fair, though, that sounds harsh. And that's where I was saying before, like this is how people have been conditioned over decades of building and whatever with PCs.
Yeah. Or buying laptops, and you just feel like you have to throw the whole thing out and buy a new one.
Sure, but even to date, you've not actually got a proper upgrade path with an Intel platform that I'm aware of. Like 12th gen to 14th gen was probably one of the better examples. Most of the platforms have just been refreshes, right? So whenever there's a truly new architecture, it's a new socket. So to be fair to those people, and again, we're seeing a lot of these people commenting like, I upgrade every 4 years or every 6 years, and therefore platform longevity doesn't make sense to me. We're like, hang on, we're talking about platforms that if you get in at the beginning have like 6 years of support. I mean, longer really, but 6 years of where it's like very viable to make those upgrades. And perhaps we're going to see a repeat with AM5 on that. And the other thing that I don't think people really consider or understand is the secondhand CPU costs. People will argue, and it's kind of funny mental gymnastics, that buying an Intel CPU is actually a better financial investment because when you go to sell it, you'll get more money back for the CPU because other people like you have been trapped on that platform. So if someone bought, a Core i5 1440, for example, and then They were like, well, I don't, my motherboard's good, my memory's good. I don't really want to go buy a Core Ultra series processor. The 14 700K offers really great performance if I could just get one of those. And then you go look online, you're paying like as much as new or whatever, and you're getting stung there because you are locked into a platform. There's only a finite amount of CPUs. And so people can, and there's nothing else for you to get. There's no future upgrade. Whereas with on AM4, these CPUs were losing their value and selling cheap, largely because largely because AMD was discounting them so aggressively, but also just because there was a slew of processors you could choose from to upgrade to. So you had many more options. There was much more supply on that platform, and the supply met the demand, and you know how that works. So it's beneficial, it's consumer friendly to have more options. It makes even like buying secondhand CPUs cheaper and more flexible. You have more options and they're generally cheaper. So I don't think it's a good thing that your platform can go up in value. It's certainly a factor. Like if you want to sell it, you can recoup a lot of that money, providing you have like a good used market and stuff like that. So it can work out in some ways, but then you still have the inconvenience of having to sell the CPU. Hope that you don't get scammed some way off that or that goes smoothly. Probably sell the motherboard as well and then buy it all over again, rebuild it, stuff we've already talked about.
Wrapping up this conversation, there's not really too many angles I can see where it doesn't make sense to have the platform longevity side of things. And I think this is the current paradigm that we're in with CPU platforms, is that they need platform longevity. And the rumors are suggesting that Intel will be doing something along these lines for their next generation platform, that it will offer some sort of platform longevity. And it doesn't seem like AMD is going to be switching to 2 years of support anytime soon either. And so that will become the norm, is platform longevity. And it'll be very interesting to see when the timings of these platforms don't align, when when it makes sense to jump on certain platforms. Because if Intel is offering a couple of years extra lifespan than AMD at a given time, or maybe it would flip the other way depending on when the platforms have been released. Yeah, it's going to be interesting to sort of weigh up that as a factor for people buying at different points. So
Intel needs to get on this. So we've
it's
got Zen
essential.
6. Got Zen 6 coming up next year. There'll be hopefully a new Intel platform and architecture. I don't know. When is that actually rumored to be coming out? You would hope it's sort of later next year, right? To compete with Zen 6.
Yeah, well, there's still supposed to be the refreshed Intel Arrow Lake stuff coming at some point. I believe that's been delayed until early next year, but I don't think it's going to be much of a fanfare release, just like a quiet, here's some, rebranded CPUs essentially. I think the next big architecture reveal for the desktop platform is supposed to be Nova Lake, right? Which is scheduled to be some point next year. I'm not 100%
Yeah.
sure on that, but
So if we get
yeah.
Zen 6, I mean, I'm guessing here, if Zen 6 is sort of a mid-year to later in the year release, so basically we're getting new AMD and new Intel CPUs. Who knows what AMD is going to announce with Zen 6, whether they're going to mention Zen 7 or future support. But if we're left guessing there, and Intel comes out and says, here's our new platform, here's our new CPUs, they look very compelling, and we're offering X amount of years or 3 or 4 generations support, could be a huge blow to AMD. Like that could be something that really gets you to start recommending these Intel CPUs.
I think it's going to be super interesting because there's going to be a lot of people on AMD platforms. So there'll be recommendations for people who have those platforms, and then maybe different recommendations for people who are on maybe AM4 looking to upgrade to a new platform or building a new PC, which is sort of similar to what we had to do for a while there with AM4 CPUs still being quite relevant. Like for budget builders, it's the price where it makes sense has been dropping lower and lower and lower with every year, right? But during the release of the AM5 platform, there were still times when those CPUs didn't make sense. If you're on AM4, you would just buy a 5800X3D and drop that CPU in, or a product very similar to that. So yeah, it's going to be, if that plays out, it's going to be very interesting because there's going to be, I guess, a lot more interest in the CPU market for people in different positions, and people will be weighing up things like, do I go to the new platform, or do I drop in a CPU into my existing platform? And yeah, competition's good. So it'll be exciting to see that, I think. Let's take a break. We'll come back and we'll talk about our boring lives. Right, Steve, we're back. What has been happening over your way? Well, I was actually there a couple of days ago, so I kind of have seen what's been going on, but what's been happening since then, at least?
Yeah, when you were here and we were basically locked in the studio all day filming Q&As and live streams and doing all that sort of stuff. So missed some fantastic weather that day. And we haven't had the best weather, which we've been talking about on past podcasts, but we've got a good bit of nice weather at the moment. So yesterday was a really nice weather, so I took some time off, got outside, did some gardening, and it was really nice, really good day. It was actually really hot. It's only meant to be like, I think 23 degrees, but out in the sun, I think because we're not used to it, it felt like it was well up in the 30s, but that wasn't the case. Anyway, really nice day. Just did some gardening, stuff like that, mowed the lawns, so that was good. And yeah, just a nice, enjoyable day outside, really. And apart from that, I have then been doing the B850 testing, so that's more work-related stuff rather than boring life, but I'm aiming to have that out probably next Wednesday. So if all goes to plan, that's when that content will be out. But yeah, just enjoying the nice weather at the moment. I don't think there's anything too crazy or unusual to really note. I've got a few things going on in the background that I'll probably be able to talk about in upcoming podcasts, but for today's one, just enjoying some nice weather, Tim.
Yeah, nice. Yeah, on the weekend, my partner had ordered some furniture from the wonderful store of IKEA. And so whenever someone orders IKEA furniture, it's always on someone else to do the building of all that stuff. So that was what I was getting up to on the weekend, is building furniture, installing it. I think, she bought a couple of mirrors and things. So it was, putting up some mounting points for the mirrors, which, these are quite heavy mirrors. So you have to, do a few things. You can't just use very basic wall hooks on that sort of stuff. So, drilling things, doing all sorts of stuff. So that was my weekend, building some furniture. The stuff from IKEA, we tend to get the stuff that's made of more actual timber panels, because IKEA has a variety of different things, but the stuff that has the actual timber stuff tends to be pretty good. So yeah, pretty happy with we just bought, I think, like a dresser for our bedroom and stuff like that. So just like drawers and basic stuff, which seems like perfectly fine stuff. But yeah, obviously the fun of flat pack furniture, having to get out and follow their instructions and put it all together, which is pretty straightforward, but it's just time consuming and a bit irritating as opposed to buying stuff that's fully built. So yeah, that was my weekend. Haven't really capitalized on the nice weather just yet. But things are going all right out this way, but just doing a bit of work during the week. So no opportunities to get out and enjoy that nice weather, because it rained pretty hard on the weekend. So it was actually a sort of a good time to be inside, just building furniture and getting all that sort of stuff ready. So yeah, that's sort of been my time at the moment. Have you tried the new Battlefield 6 Battle Royale mode yet? Because I heard when I was at your place that you were interested in it.
I've downloaded it. I have not had a chance yet, no.
Yeah,
I'm not
same
sure I
here.
will, because all my work free time, I've really got this motherboard testing done, or rather scripting at this point, so don't know how long it's going to take. But yeah, I haven't tried it out. Looks interesting. I saw Daniel Owen playing it, doing this testing, and yeah, it looked interesting.
Yeah, I'm not sure how it's going to go. It's not my sort of favorite game mode usually, so I haven't tried it out yet. Same position as you. I've sort of downloaded it, but haven't quite gotten into it. I have played the new map that's available in the regular modes, which is not my favorite map. I think it's probably pretty on the poor end. I've seen a bit of comments in the community sort of saying that, this new map, which I forget the name of, but because all the maps sort of have very generic and boring names. But basically, it's just not a particularly enjoyable map, but whatever. And the Battle Royale stuff, I always find it hard seeing opinions of it online. Like if I'm looking for people to sort of say, is this good? Is it worth trying out? There's people who play like very specific games who are like, oh, I came from Warzone and I played this and I didn't like it because I'm so familiar with Warzone or whatever. It's like, well, I don't really care too much about Warzone and the comparisons to Warzone. So yeah, I'll have to just try it out for myself, I think, and figure it out. But yeah, still enjoying the regular game mode. So if it doesn't pan out for me, at least the rest of Battlefield 6, I'm still enjoying, and they're tweaking it over time to improve it. So yeah, that's been sort of good. So yeah,
Mhm.
that's it really from us. So very short, sort of boring life section at the moment
Mhm.
because there's not really too much else to talk about, especially as we get into November, which is usually a pretty busy time for the channel as we're sort of getting our end of year content ready, stuff ready for the sales periods and that sort of thing. So you have all the information that you need. So that'll be coming out over the next month or so. And yeah, that's pretty much it, right? Unless you have anything else to chat about.
No, I don't think so. Like I said, I'll have more things to chat about soon, but they're developing stories, so we'll have to wait, Tim. We won't
Mm.
spoil them.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah, I think I've heard a few whispers of what that might be. So it could be some interesting stuff to talk about in the next couple
Mhm.
of episodes. So, yeah.
Mhm.
Anyway, that's it for this week's episode. If you do enjoy the Hardware Unboxed podcast, then consider subscribing to our YouTube channel where you get the video version. Otherwise, obviously, we're in all the usual audio feeds. If you want to support Hardware Unboxed, we've got Patreon. You get access to the supporter feed for this podcast, which is ad free, has a few bonuses every once in a while in there. But yeah, that's it for this one. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.